In the spring of 1846, America was an idea catching fire. It was the era of manifest destiny, a phrase coined just a year prior, whispering to thousands of families that the American continent was theirs by divine right. From the crowded towns of Illinois and Missouri, eyes turned westward toward a mythic land of endless summer, fertile soil, and boundless wealth, California. To reach this paradise, families liquidated their lives. They sold farms, brick homes, and businesses to buy heavy wood and iron wagons, teams of oxen, and supplies meant to last 6 arduous months across prairies, deserts, and mountain passes. Among them was a group that would eventually become synonymous with human desperation, the Donner and Reed families. Led by George Donner, a wealthy 62-year-old farmer from Springfield, Illinois, and James Reed, an ambitious, aristocratic businessman and veteran of the Black Hawk War, the party was not a collection of hardened mountain men. They were families, mothers carrying infants, elderly grandmothers, children running alongside wagons packed with heirlooms, silver, books, and fine furniture. James Reed's wagon was a legend unto itself, a custom-built, 2-story palace on wheels nicknamed the Pioneer Palace car, featuring built-in spring seats and a stove pulled by a massive team of 8 oxen. It was a symbol of optimism, a symbol that the wilderness could not only be traversed, but tamed. When the combined wagon train rolled out of Independence, Missouri, in May of 1846, it comprised nearly 90 human souls, 500 head of cattle, and nearly 30 wagons. They were on schedule, they were well provisioned, and by all accounts, they were destined for prosperity. What they did not know was that thousands of miles ahead, a web of hubris, flawed geography, and catastrophic weather was quietly spinning into a trap. And the strategy they would ultimately employ to survive that trap would become the darkest taboo in American history. Every tragedy requires a catalyst. For the Donner Party, that catalyst was a man who was not even with them in the wilderness. His name was Lansford Hastings. Hastings was an ambitious 27-year-old lawyer from Ohio with grand political dreams. He envisioned an independent republic in California with himself as its president. To achieve this, he needed one thing above all else: American settlers, thousands of them. In 1845, Hastings published a book titled The Emigrant's Guide to Oregon and California. Within its pages, he described a bold new route, a shortcut that promised to shave hundreds of miles and weeks of travel off the traditional journey. Instead of following the proven route north through Fort Hall in modern-day Idaho, Hastings advocated cutting south of the Great Salt Lake, traversing the Great Salt Lake Desert, and cutting directly through the Wasatch Mountains. He called it the Hastings Cutoff. There was only one problem. Lansford Hastings had never actually taken wagons through this cutoff when he wrote the book. It was an unproven, theoretical path printed as absolute fact to lure pioneers into California quickly. In July 1846, as the Donner-Reed party reached Little Sandy Creek in Wyoming, they faced their first fatal crossroads. Experienced mountain men warned them. Jim Bridger, running a trading post along the route, eagerly promoted the cutoff, largely because it brought emigrants directly to his store, but others offered grave warnings. Journalist Edwin Bryant sent letters back along the trail, warning wagon parties with families that the Hastings cutoff was too rugged, too dry, and completely unfit for heavy wagons. A vote was cast. The majority of the wagon train, prioritizing safety, turned north toward Fort Hall, but George Donner, James Reed, and a handful of other families made a fateful choice. Believing the cutoff would save them critical weeks before winter hit the Sierra Nevada mountains, they split from the main trail. They elected George Donner as their leader. From that moment forward, they were the Donner Party. Almost immediately, the shortcut revealed itself to be a nightmare. When the party reached the edge of the Wasatch Range in Utah, they found a note left on a tree branch by Lansford Hastings himself. He had gone ahead with an earlier group, but left word that the trail ahead was nearly impassable. He instructed them to wait or send a courier ahead to find him. James Reed rode ahead on horseback, caught up with Hastings, and returned with vague directions for an alternate route through Weber Canyon and the surrounding wilderness. Instead of saving time, the Donner Party was forced to hack a brand new road through dense brush, massive boulders, and timber in the Wasatch Mountains. They spent 21 excruciating days clearing a path that should have taken 3. Oxen were exhausted, wagons were battered, tensions began to boil in the sweltering summer heat. By the time they cleared the mountains and stood at the edge of the Great Salt Lake Desert, it was late August. They were already dangerously behind schedule, but the desert held an even crueler surprise. Hastings had promised the desert crossing would take 2 days and cover roughly 40 miles. It was actually 80 miles. For 6 agonizing days, the party dragged their heavy wagons across a blinding expanse of white salt and mud. The crust broke under the heavy wheels, sinking into sludge. The sun baked the drivers and their animals without mercy. Mirages played tricks on their eyes. Water ran out completely. Under the strain, 36 oxen ran off into the desert night, wild with thirst, never to be seen again. James Reed's prized Pioneer Palace car had to be abandoned in the salt flats, along with 4 other wagons. Supplies were dumped alongside the trail to lighten the load. When the Donner Party finally limped off the salt flats and reached the foot of the Ruby Mountains in Nevada, the psychological toll was devastating. They had lost critical time, priceless draft animals, and a massive portion of their food reserves. More importantly, the social cohesion of the group was unraveling. The spirit of shared community had dissolved into suspicion, anger, and self-preservation. And the Sierra Nevada mountains still loomed in the distance. By October 1846, the Donner Party was racing along the Humboldt River in modern-day Nevada. The shortcut had cost them an extra month of travel. Supplies were running critically low, and the strain of survival was breaking down basic morality. On October 5, near Iron Point, Nevada, 2 wagons tangled as drivers tried to pass one another on a steep slope. An argument erupted between John Snyder, a popular teamster, and James Reed. In a fit of fury, Snyder struck Reed over the head with the butt of his heavy bullwhip. Reed's wife, Margaret, stepped between them to intervene and was struck by the whip as well. Seeing his wife struck, Reed pulled a hunting knife and stabbed Snyder through the chest. Within minutes, Snyder was dead. The party was stunned. In a makeshift courtroom around the campfires, several members called for Reed to be hanged on the spot. Instead, a compromise was reached. James Reed was banished from the wagon train. He was sent ahead into the wilderness without a rifle or supplies, separated from his wife and 4 children, forced to ride toward California alone. The loss of Reed left the party leaderless and paralyzed by distrust. Days later, an elderly German immigrant named Hardcoop became too weak to walk. The party refused to stop or let him ride in a wagon. He was left behind by the road to sit under a tree and freeze to death. Another man, William Eddy, had his oxen killed by local Native Americans and was left to carry his toddler across the harsh Nevada plains on foot, begging others for water for his dying child. Community had vanished. It was now every family for themselves. In late October, the party reached the eastern slope of the Sierra Nevada mountains. The mountain pass was in sight. Beyond it lay Sutter's Fort and the fertile Sacramento Valley. They were just 1 week away from safety. They stopped near Truckee Lake, known today as Donner Lake, to let their exhausted animals rest for a single day before tackling the final climb. It was the most catastrophic rest in American history. On October 31, 1846, 5 weeks earlier than normal, a massive, historic Arctic blizzard slammed into the Sierra Nevada range. Flakes the size of silver dollars fell continuously for 8 straight days. The wind raged through the pine trees like a freight train. When the storm finally paused, snow was drifted 5 to 10 feet deep across the pass, completely walling off the trail. The pioneers made 3 desperate attempts to climb the pass, driving their cattle through deep drifts, carrying small children in their arms. Each time, they were beaten back by sub-zero temperatures and knee-deep snow. The trap had sprung. 89 men, women, and children were frozen in place at the high elevation of 6,000 feet, locked out of California by an insurmountable wall of ice. Realizing they could go no further, the emigrants fell back to the shores of Truckee Lake and nearby Alder Creek to build shelter. These were not sturdy cabins, built hastily out of green logs, pine branches, and wagon canvas. They lacked proper roofs and floors. Snow leaked through the cracks constantly. Cold mud served as flooring. Darkness, smoke from fires, and wet freezing air filled the small spaces where multiple families squeezed together. At the lake, the Breen, Murphy, Grave, and Reed families crammed into 3 crude shelters. 5 miles away at Alder Creek, the Donner family and their hands were caught in the open before they could reach the lake, forced to live under makeshift tents made of canvas and pine twigs. Very quickly, the food situation became desperate. The early blizzard had buried the remaining cattle and horses alive under 6 feet of snow. The starving emigrants stumbled through the white void with long poles, poking into the snow drift by drift, trying to find the frozen carcasses of their draft animals. When they found one, they dragged the frozen meat back to camp. They ate everything. They boiled the bones into a gelatinous broth. They singed the hair off the hide leather, scraped off the ash, and boiled the hide into a thick, tasteless glue that coated their teeth. Patrick Breen, a deeply devout Irish immigrant trapped at the lake with his wife and 7 children, kept a daily diary during those long months. His entries reveal the stark, creeping march of death. Deck 1, cold, clear air, cattle all dead under snow, looking to God for mercy. Deck 9, wind blowing hard from the west, snowing fast, very difficult to get wood. By mid-December, even the boiled hide was running out. Mice that ran across the floor were caught and eaten raw by starving children. Old shoes, leather wagon straps, and rug remnants were boiled down for nourishment. Scurvy set in. Frostbite turned toes black. Starvation stripped the human body down to skin and bone, inducing hallucination, apathy, and cognitive decay. They realized no help was coming from the outside world. If anyone was going to live, someone had to walk out of the mountains on foot. On December 15, 1846, 15 of the strongest emigrants, 5 women, 9 men, and 2 Native American guides named Louis and Salvador, decided to undertake a suicide mission. They constructed crude, heavy snowshoes out of ox bows and wagon wood. They packed 6 days of starvation rations consisting of thin strips of dried beef and set off to cross the 7,000-foot pass on foot to get help. They called themselves the Forlorn Hope. On the 3rd day out, a blinding storm erased the trail. Snow blindness struck several members. Their 6-day food supply was gone by day 4. On Christmas Eve, Trapped in a howling blizzard without fire, 12-year-old Lemuel Murphy began babbling incoherently from severe hypothermia and starvation. He died in his sister's arms that night. The survivors huddled together under a wet blanket as the snow buried them, staying warm by the heat of each other's failing bodies. 4 people died in that storm over the next 48 hours: Antoine, Patrick Dolan, Franklin Grave, and Lemuel Murphy. The living were now starving to death in a frozen wilderness, miles from civilization, with zero food left. It was here, in the white void of the Sierra Nevada, that the taboo was broken. Desperate to survive, Patrick Dolan had suggested before his death that they draw lots to see who should die so the others could eat. His suggestion had been rejected, but now, with bodies lying in the snow next to them, the survivors faced a binary choice: consume human flesh or die within 24 hours. With tears streaming down their sun-blistered faces, the survivors weepingly prepared the meat of their fallen companions. To spare themselves psychological torture, a strict rule was established: no person would eat from the body of a family member. They dried the remaining meat over a small fire to sustain them on the rest of the journey. As the days wore on, even that meat ran out. The 2 Miwok Native American guides, Louis and Salvador, who had been sent by John Sutter weeks earlier to help the party, refused to eat human flesh. Fearing they would be killed next when the party grew hungry again, the 2 guides slipped away into the woods. Days later, William Eddy found Louis and Salvador lying in the snow, too weak from starvation to move. Driven past the brink of sanity, William Eddy shot and killed both guides. They were the only members of the Donner Party actively murdered for food. On January 17, 1847, 33 days after leaving Truckee Lake, 7 skeletal figures staggered out of the foothills into a Native American village in the Sacramento Valley. Of the 15 members of the Forlorn Hope who set out, only 2 men and all 5 women survived. Every woman who took part in the trek made it through alive. The news they brought shocked California. Tens of people were still alive in the mountains, frozen in place, eating leather to stay alive. When news reached the settlements, relief efforts were organized immediately. Among the organizers was James Reed, the man banished months earlier. He had reached California safely and had spent months trying to raise an army of rescuers to go back for his wife and children. The Mexican-American War was raging across California at the time, making men, horses, and food scarce. But by February 1847, the first relief party, a squad of 7 tough mountain men carrying backpacks of food, managed to scale the pass on snowshoes. When the rescuers arrived at Truckee Lake on February 19, 1847, they stepped into a scene out of a nightmare. The cabins were completely buried under 12 feet of snow. Only small hole-like chimneys protruded through the white surface, drifting smoke into the icy air. As the rescuers approached, gaunt, filthy human beings crawled up out of the snow pits like ghosts. Their eyes were sunken, their skin stretched tight over bone, their voices cracked and inhuman. A woman emerged from a snow hole, stared at the rescuers, and whimpered, "Are you men from California, or are you from heaven?" 12 people at the camps had already died of starvation. The first relief could only carry back 21 of the strongest survivors, mostly children. Among them were James Reed's children. Because supplies were limited, adults and the weakest children had to be left behind to wait for a second relief team. Before the second relief could arrive, weather closed in again. At the lake camps, the remaining survivors, now stripped of hide and leather, succumbed completely to the taboo. When the second relief, led by James Reed himself, finally breached the pass in early March. They found the remaining cabins strewn with butchered human limbs. At Alder Creek, Jacob Donner had died, and his wife and children were surviving on his body. Patrick Breen wrote in his diary, Feb 26, Mrs. Murphy says she will commence on Milt Elliott today. God send us help soon. A third and fourth relief party followed over the coming weeks, pulling out the last survivors piecemeal. Mothers were forced to choose which children to leave behind in the snow and which to take with the rescuers, knowing those left behind might be eaten before the next party arrived. Tamzine Donner, wife of party leader George Donner, refused to leave her dying, bedridden husband at Alder Creek. She sent her 3 young daughters ahead with the third relief to safety, kissing them goodbye and stepping back down into the snow hut to sit by her dying husband. She would not survive the winter. By April